Hi, everybody, and welcome to our very first Design Showcase West design salon from UCLA. And this is a special occasion because we're going to showcase Apple TV's great productions and great designers this year. I'd like to introduce my friends and colleagues, Jill Ohanneson, John Dunn, and Trish Summerville, all multiple Emmy nominees and veterans of our great field. And now let's look at For All Mankind.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a live signal.
Is this really happening?
The Russians put the first man on the moon.
You thought it was about being first. Turns out the stakes are much bigger than that.
Nixon wants us to put a woman on the moon.
Anybody tell the president that we don't have any female astronauts?
You are officially astronaut candidates.
It's not easy. It's not supposed to be easy, Tracy.
How many moms do you know are training to go into outer space?
The world's changing, and you helped change it.
If we wait, the Russians will win this.
So Jill, you had to start. This is the old space race, but it's through the lens of really you could say suffrage or the women's movement. How did you do your research? You went all the way back. What year did you start with your research, and where did you go?
Well, it was so interesting when I was researching because I wanted to start earlier in the 60s. Our showrunner, Ron Moore, really wanted the clothes to feel like Houston, like Middle America, didn't want the feeling of New York or Los Angeles. So I went directly to Sears, Penny's, and Montgomery Ward catalogs because I was having trouble finding a good resource or a quantitative resource in color. So much of the photography was still black and white. But I found that there was a good number of these catalogs that were done in color, and that was incredibly helpful. So I started putting all of my boards together from, the Sears, Penny's, and Montgomery Ward's catalogs. And because Ron didn't want it to be high fashion, he wanted this to be scientists and kind of, tech geeks and people who were in the military, not fashion forward people. So I started actually in the early 60s, and I would say like 62, 63. So that was the start. And I did research again through the catalogs. I did a lot of black and white photography research online, and did, of course, numerous resources from different costume houses and different research libraries.
And let's take a look at that first picture.
Definitely.
So walk us through this picture.
So it was very important to Ron Moore, our showrunner, Dan Bishop, our production designer, and myself that we were able to show the two different worlds of For All Mankind. And that is what happens at NASA and the careers of these astronauts and scientists, and then what's happening at home. With the families and the children of these astronauts and the people who are working that. So we really wanted to create two different worlds. And we ended up doing that with a color palette. So the color palette for NASA is very cold. It's very clinical. It's very, sleek and not a lot of warmth. And so blues, grays, blacks, navies, forest greens, eggplants, things like that. And because we were having a very simple color palette, it became very important to bring texture, into the clothing and the fabrics of the principals and the, surrounding background.
A show like this is often overlooked because it's really the recreation
Yes.
of of real life. And the kind of in-depth research you do somehow never registers, because what you're creating is you're recreating a world, and that is so nuanced, but there's so much work and so much research involved. You shared with us that you used catalogs from the time, which is amazing, really middle America. Where did you source these clothes?
I sourced the costumes all over the country. I had contacts from another period show I had done a number of years ago. I contacted everyone that I had worked with before. We went to every single costume house in the town of Los Angeles and pulled from there, because we were really creating our different worlds. And so we had, these racks are NASA and these are our racks for the families. And we were at every Rose Bowl, every flea market, every weekend flea market, every, vintage show that was out there, so we were often working on the weekends just to make sure that we could really have everything we needed, because we're dressing everybody from head to toe. Wow. Underwear and also from the inside out, lingerie, hosiery, particular bras. And so it was very important that we had a large amount of stock, as you can see from a number of scenes that we had numerous sequences that were 200, 300, 400 people.
And you can really see that attention to detail in the next image, the next slide. You can really see how you built the silhouette.
Yes, it was, again, you can see that here we're in a warmer color palette. This is more intimate. It's everybody's at home. We're looking at families. We're looking at the wives. We're looking at the children. And so we wanted it to be very kind of encompassing and more intimate and up close and vulnerable. So it really was for me about taking each of these characters of our show and giving them not just a background that I got from our showrunner, but really helping the actress create a character that she can work from, or that he can work from. So for that particular actress, we wanted a very motherly, very feminine, very kind of 50s feel. So she was always in fuller skirts, very nipped waist, always put together, jewelry, hose, everything matched all the time.
And you built closets for each of these characters.
Absolutely. We had full closets for all of them. I would do fittings of 20 to 30 outfits, and then we would continue to use those over the next couple of episodes.
So you were really working specifically on character arcs for each person.
Absolutely. I definitely consider myself a character-based designer. It's very important to me that each character has their own story to tell. And I like to think of where they came from. I like to think of where they are right now. And then I like to think of where they're going. And, that's my job as the part of the storytelling team, to help tell that story with the way the costumes look, feel, move, and how they help the actor or actress inhabit the character.
So I'm also very interested in did you work with NASA? Because if we go to that next picture, these look very official. Did you use NASA archives at all?
Yes, we definitely used NASA archives. We also had our own astronaut consultant, Garrett Reisman, who really helped us with so many of the details of the show. And if it was something that he didn't know, he put us in touch with people who knew. And so everything in this particular photo was built from scratch, except for the boots. None of these light blue flight suits existed in any kind of numbers. There were one or two I found on eBay, but they were, in really bad shape. Plus, none of them were fit for women. So we made all of these jumpsuits from scratch. And then when we were doing these vests, these evacuation vests, they were all cut for men. So we had to completely take them apart and recut them for women. It was a very interesting process.
Incredible. How many women did you fit in these NASA outfits or in these NASA uniforms?
I think we were up to a dozen at the height of it. So that was the most.
That's incredible. I have a question for you. Had you worked with this showrunner before?
Yes, I had actually. When I first got into television, when I left features, to put my son into school, I had worked with Ron Moore on Roswell, the last season of Roswell, and so we had met at that point. And I also am friends with his wife, Terry Dresbach, and so she had known me and had worked with my sister, and so we had know each other, and whenever we saw each other at rental houses and such. So, I think part of that process had to do with helping Ron to find the right person for this show, especially as Terry was just coming off of Outlander, and she was like, "No, I need a break." I think that's what was going on.
Terry's another great costume designer.
Fantastic, amazing costume designer.
Well, it's high praise that she recommended you to her husband to design this show.
I feel exactly the same way.
Yes, because you can't get this kind of show wrong. The recreation of creating a new history, what could have been. And I think you've done an amazing job on the show. Listen, if you had anything to do over on the show, is there anything that you would change?
I think if I were to change anything, I would have somebody on my crew that was a military specialist, because the military in our show, and there was quite a bit of it since so many of the astronauts came from Navy and Air Force, is that the combination of the military and NASA creates a whole new world of patches and insignia. And there was a little bit of some struggle with that. And so we wished, going forward that we could find somebody who was a good fit for that and that could also kind of wrangle the spacesuits.
And you must love working with a showrunner who is a writer-director.
I cannot tell you how supportive and how inspiring it is to work with Ron. He really sets the bar, high, and supports everybody in getting there, and really hires people, lets them do their job, but is there when we need questions answered. And I feel very honored to be part of his team on this show.
Did you enjoy it?
I did. I really did. It was incredibly creative. And, I have done period before, and I love this period, late 60s, early 70s. But I also love delving into the world of NASA and spacesuits. I mean, I remember, when we landed on the moon, and it was so phenomenally exciting for everybody in the world. And so to be part of this and to kind of do this recreation, just felt such an incredible honor. So I really, really loved being part of this show and this particular crew. Thank you.
Incredibly exciting project. And now let's look at Dickinson.
The moment you've all been waiting for. A female poet, Emily Dickinson. I'm a gorgeous
A woman should receive an education, but should not be the same as a man.
Maybe they're scared that if they teach us how the world works, we'll figure out how to take over.
Morning, ladies. I don't know how the two of you fit into such a tiny bed. I don't give up.
I have one purpose: to become a great writer. And there's nothing you can do to stop me.
Hey. She's so insane. Of course she's insane. She's Emily Dickinson.
You need to cut out these sort of antics.
I have to do something, Sue. Desperate times, girl. Don't act like you're dead while you're still alive.
If you want something, reach out and grab it. Sick.
You'll be the only Dickinson they talk about in 200 years. I promise you that.
That was a lovely funeral, don't you think?
Mine'll be better.
John.
Hi.
John, you must have been so excited when you got this script.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's a really, really wonderful show to have worked on. Definitely.
Can you synopsize it for everybody?
Yeah. What it is it's a series that has 10 episodes, and it is the kind of irreverent riff on the life of the early Emily Dickinson. And so it takes us through a year of her life with her family and her friends in the town of Amherst, where she, in fact, grew up.
And it feels like it was based on a graphic novel, or who came up with this idea?
Elena Smith was the creator of the show, and it's very much her baby. And she used it, I think, in a way to really explore even contemporary issues of women and coming against the glass ceiling and such. That's something early on that Emily came up against. And so without lecturing or being pedantic, I think Elena came up with a very clever way to sort of explore those issues for young women.
So I noticed in the trailer that the language was updated, and maybe some of the plot was updated. Did you update the clothes at all? What period was it anyway? What was your year?
My year was pretty much 1850. And so we were locked in for that pretty much for the season. But of course, that involves showing a lot of clothing from earlier periods because people were not always wearing the most contemporary clothing at the time. So it is, in fact, 1850s. So it's in the middle of that century. And I think many people have this concept of the century as dark and gloomy and sepia and brown. And I think part of that is caused by a couple of things. Obviously, photography was largely black and white at that point. And the second half of the century had some really horrific things happen. The Civil War, just as a primary example. Victoria in England pretty much plunged all of the world into black after the death of Albert in the 1860s.
Right.
But prior to that, it was just this very colorful, exuberant, wonderfly patterned and crazily juxtaposed fabrics that people used to love to dress in. And so I did a lot of research in that direction and decided to just sort of riff on that. As far as accuracy, we were very accurate on the show. The sets, the lighting, we did much of it by candlelight and lantern lights as they would have been using at the time. And we wanted to really create I guess you'd say a foundation for then Elena to be able to riff off into this world of contemporary language and fantasies. There's 2 or 3 fantasies per episode.
I wanted to take note of that because many films that update the past, like Marie Antoinette, also update the clothes. But from what I saw, your clothes look very real. Right?
Yeah, we were very, very accurate. I mean, all the foundation garments are there. Every woman's in a corset all the time. All the hose and the petticoats, all 10 of them, all the bloomers, it's all there and it's real. But I know what you're talking about, other films and projects that update. And
exactly.
For myself, I find that often a little distracting, and I get a little ungrounded in the world. It takes me a while to figure out where I'm at and what's going to show up. So I think it was important to Elena to have a very strong foundation so that she could run off with her fantasy.
Well, it worked beautifully. Let's look at that first image with this beautiful, beautiful blue dress. Tell us a little bit about what we're seeing.
Well, this is a day dress for Emily. And of course, at this point, she's a young woman. She is, her father is a pillar of the community. He, in fact, goes off to Washington as a congressman from the state of Massachusetts. And so I, was researching the clothing of the period, and my God, the fabrics were insane. I mean, absolutely, the patterns that they would juxtapose in just one piece of fabric. You'd get a floral with a stripe, and then why not throw in a paisley, and then mix up these colors. So I started with the fabrics, and then as we found these fabrics that felt very true to the 1850s, to a young woman of this period of her station, we then, I would sort of base the dress on where the fabric took me, which I think is often the case that was happening when they were making clothing out of these wild patterns. So often, you know, I would alter the actual design of the sleeve, the shape of the bodice, just to highlight the fabrics.
Yeah, it looks like you did that there with the smocking across the waist.
Yeah.
But
Stocking was huge at that time, and we also hewed very much to construction of the period. I mean, if it, you know, yeah, maybe we had a little machine sewing happening, but there was an amazing amount of handwork, especially up on the bodices where you're seeing it.
Where did you construct all of these beautiful clothes?
We were based in New York, and so I had my own shop set up at Steiner Studio, where our sets were and where we did all of our interior filming. And we did film exteriors in a town called Bethel for the crowd scenes and such. But that's where my shop was. And then additionally, the work going into one of these dresses, you know, especially when you're doing so much by hand, hours and hours and hours. So I did have shops. Fortunately, I'm in New York, and there's many a shop that services the arts, the theater, the ballet, the opera. Yes. And I was able to work with each of them and as needed. So we were running all over town, but it
paid off.
Yeah.
Now let's look at the next picture. What a dress.
Well, thank you.
So what is this moment in this, what is this scene where she's wearing this red dress?
Emily, when she was, you know, exploring her world and starting her poetry, which is what she's just starting to do in our series, she locks herself away in her bedroom, and she often goes into this place where she fantasizes something or is trying to solve something in her life through the poetry, and she just goes into a mental fantasy of her own. And she had a particular fascination throughout her life with death. And so we actually visually enacted Emily's ideas of meeting up with death and rendezvousing with death. And what you're seeing in the back is the horse-drawn carriage that Death arrives at her Amherst home in, and she runs out of her house. And as she comes through the door, she is in this red dress. Actually, she's in a cape, a beautiful gunmetal cape, which is pulled up at her feet in this photograph. But it was literally one of those just release at the neck, and it just whoosh disappeared, and this dress appeared.
So it's a reveal.
Oh, yeah. And it was, you know, one of those 3 o'clock in the morning, is it going to work or isn't it? And it did it the first time, and it was brilliant.
So all covered up in dark gray, and then drops, and she's in red.
Yes. And, you know, obviously one doesn't know exactly what the real Emily Dickinson would have imagined herself in, but it's so sensual and so luscious and such a wonderfly different look from the Emily that we see in the rest of the series that I just had to go there with the red dress.
Well, she looks like the bride, you know, the Scarlet Woman, or the Bride in Red, or the Bride Wore Red, maybe.
There you go. Yeah.
Right. Let's look at the next image too. So much work, and in television, where you get very close to those bodices, we all can appreciate the amount of handwork in these clothes, John.
Thank you so much. Well, you know, I remember back when I did Boardwalk Empire a few years back, and I was like, why can't we have beautiful clothing on television the way we do in the film? And of course, I know now it's incredibly hard to produce clothing like that at the speed of television. However, I think it pays off. I mean, if you take the time to put in the detailing, it just brings a richness. It brings more detail. It makes the person look more real too. If you build as much detail into the clothing as you possibly can. Mm-hmm. So yes, this is This is Emily's sister, Lavinia, who is quite different from Emily. She is, she's a little younger and just obsessed with the boys in town, and and so she and her siblings, her parents go away. Their parents go away for a weekend or a week trip, and so they conspire together and decide to throw this party and invite all the young people in town.
Well, it looks like the sets, the world is as beautifully designed as the costumes, and you must have worked very closely with the production designer as well.
Yes, the production designer, Lauren Wheat's brilliant. We worked hand in hand the whole time. I was petrified because, of course, you've seen little glimpses of it, but the wallpapers, the colors, the patterns, it was a lot to play against. And at a certain point, I had to just like close my eyes and let go and say, yes, it's going to work together. And I think it does very much. I mean, we did plan things out, obviously. But sometimes we had to, as characters were just moving from room to room within the Dickinson house, things were changing madly. And so I think that adds a whole sort of frisson to the whole look of the show. And it was very exciting.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, based on that last image that we just saw, what you were talking about in terms of the level of detail, making the clothes look real, it really looks like they're wearing their own clothes and that they're in their own house. And sometimes having that pattern on pattern on pattern just gives a richness and a tapestry to the frame that a flat wall or a plain wall just simply doesn't bring to the narrative.
Yes, it's absolutely true. And like I said, it can be scary, but I think you point something out, as designers, we want everything to be perfect. Often we became designers because we have a good eye, which who knows why we were given these eyes, but we have a good eye, and the eye wants to correct things. But it's always been one of my philosophies that I have to figure out some way to outsmart myself, I guess you'd say, and pull back and let that wrong thing, that wrong juxtaposition, just bring the screen to life. So yes. I think Dickinson was a real lesson in that. So I feel much freer now as a designer having done that.
It sounds like you had a wonderful time and you loved the experiences. I hope that's true.
It was. I had an amazing team of people. I had really good support. And, it was one of those shows where we had all the scripts in advance. So we knew what we were doing. And you have to, for something like 1850s, I mean, obviously you are dressing every inch of the actor, and you have to, it's not like they're going to bring you something from home that just might work. So, you know what I mean? So we had our stock of clothing for when, the background showed up and we had to dress all of them. They were all dressed soup to nuts as well. So that's when you have that kind of ability to really control the world and create the world. It's very satisfying if it works out.
Thank you very, very much. We're going to move on to Trish Summerville, and thank you. See you later, John. And now let's have a look at C.
Centuries from now, almost all humans have lost the ability to see. Some say sight was taken from them by God to heal the earth. For the few who remain, vision is only a myth. After so many years, the power of sight has returned.
What is it? Something's different. The children, they have the ability to see.
For my children, they have a power that we would call magical or evil.
We must protect them.
For centuries, we feared this day would come. The evil of light once almost destroyed the world. And now it has returned. Find the children who can see and bring them to me.
Now they will come for us.
If we kill the babies, they might leave us alone.
No! I stand with Baba Boss!
These children are a gift. They will bring knowledge. They will begin a new world.
We are family. We are one. We fight as one. I have to keep you safe.
The moment has come. It's astonishing how the smallest moment can change an entire world.
I'm obsessed by the trailer.
Great.
Hi, Trish.
Hi, Deborah. How are you?
Keep running it. Keep running it. Hi, I'm okay. Can you give us a synopsis of that epic?
Well, as it kind of says in the trailer, it's the world several hundred years in the future, and a virus has taken over and taken humans' ability to sight. It's hindered the eyes, and so this civilization's gone on for hundreds of years without sight, so they don't know anything of sight or of books or anything like that. So it's kind of following this family on this journey, and they have children who are born with sight, and they're the only two people that they know of that have sight. And then the story kind of goes along through there, and they make this journey. It's definitely a story about family and perseverance, and about bias and bigotry, and and the world. So it's just set several hundred years in the future.
Sarah, oh my goodness.
It was big. It's a big show.
It's just about
that. It's a big show. It's a really big show. Yeah.
It's a really, really big show. So was this based on a graphic novel or a comic book?
No, this was all based out of Stephen Knight's mind. He came up with the original concept of it, and he and Francis Lawrence worked really closely on the scripts and how the character development happened. And luckily, I've worked with Francis before on other projects, and he's really creatively collaborative. So I really enjoy working with him. And he let me bring a lot of things to the table, which is great, and overseeing, hair and makeup. And we had a great hair and makeup team as well, which, we know that was all a whole overall look. So I mean, it was just a really amazing adventure, and I did a lot of research.
So how did you start? Bring us through your before we get to the images. Bring us through your process, your creative process.
So in the beginning, trying to figure out, since it is set several hundred years in the future, trying to look at what is non-biodegradable, what takes so many years to degrade, and kind of seeing what would be left around in civilization that could be repurposed and used. And so we kind of started with that, made this big chart of how many years things take to break down, which is quite terrifying. So and so starting with that, and then also working with, we had some some people that we worked with, consultants on dealing with a sightless community, and that really helped us a lot. We, each department kind of took these classes and workshops, and that really helped in the sense of how I could figure out what the clothing should look like and what would still be appealing to a sighted audience watching the show. So that was a big undertaking, and figuring out things of working with scent and texture and sounds was big for us. So a lot of the dyeing we did was my team was really great. We would all go out and kind of forage and bring back flowers and plants and herbs and eucalyptus, and then boil them and kind of use it with the fabrics to see what would leave a print, what would induce smell and scent. So it was just a lot of research on, what animals would exist then, if they farmed, what they would have, and trying to resource logically where I could get clothing from to cover people's bodies, and why there would be certain things that had adornment to it, even though it's a sightless community. It's still this kind of lineage and heritage that they've known from their past of what is, considered precious and what's not considered precious. And even though, we were shooting in like winter exteriors in Vancouver, so we had to have layers and we had to have things logically for warmth because it was freezing cold.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just think, how do you express through the medium that clothing smells, or you're identifying people by scent? That's so fascinating. I don't know if that ever stated in any dialogue that they find people by scent. That's an amazing idea.
There's a couple of things, especially with there's two, what you can kind of see in the trailer, that there's two main tribes. So Jason Momoa's tribe, which is called the Alchemy, and he's known as Baba Voss. So his tribe is mainly like a Highlands tribe, living in the woods, and they live very naturally. And it's a small community, about 100 people in their tribe. And so with them, we went with very natural scents and smells and did stuff that was bug repellents, like citronella, different types of eucalyptus in their clothing. And then you do see them washing their clothes a lot, because having scent, it's like, that's the thing that resonates a lot. So they're a very clean group of people. But then they use things as mud. You see in the battle scene, I came up with Francis of like, being sightless, how do you know friend or foe? And so coming up with, like, they made this mud out of berries and dirt, and it's a poignant scent in the Alchemy village that they smear that on their face and rub it on their clothes. So when they are in battle, because as a sightless battle, you have to be very close in hand-to-hand combat. So you do get close enough to smell someone. So that's why smell was really important there. And then in the other tribes, like with the Queen in the Ohanneson and Tamakti June, I chose to instill color there, and that we did with roses and various types of flowers and again eucalyptus, but a different eucalyptus leaf that would leave the clothing bright corals and orange.
Wow.
And would also leave a print. So it gave me this advantage to being able to incorporate print some kind of way.
It's incredible. We have a picture. Is this the Queen?
That's the Queen. That's Queen Kane, played by Sylvia Hoeks.
Well, lead us through this beautiful costume.
So in this costume, for the Queen, they live, so kind of where the story begins taking place is considered to be like along New York. And so I came up with this idea that I wanted her to have a subdermal body piece, so that it would be something that was handed down through lineage, so that the king before her had it. When he dies, it's removed and implanted into her. And I came up with the idea of it should be something to do with the Statue of Liberty, Lady Liberty. So in the Queen's mind and through the kingdom, there's something about the Lady Liberty spikes. So then we made this crown for her, which is actually made out of metal chopsticks, bicycle parts, cables, and the back is a wolf's head, which I used a lot of roadkill for a lot of the furs. I don't use fur in projects, but this helped tell the story, I felt, a lot, and we needed the fur because of the weather. So we used a lot of roadkill and a lot of First Nations and family farms we bought stuff from. So the back is a wolf's head to keep her warm because she's bald. But in the coat that she's wearing, there's this amazing woman, Janice, who does art installations that we found her and had her felt fabric for us. This coat that you're actually looking at originally was a flat piece of Panay velvet in a mauve kind of a tone. And we cut all the pattern pieces out and had her felt these pieces for us and weaving in metallics. And we did several samples to see how we really wanted it to look. So even in the actual coat, because there's silk woven into it and felted, so it's all pressed into the fabric, and wools and metallics, there's actually also real silk cocoon husk that I loved how they look, because they kind of look like pieces of grated metal that's also woven into it. And so the idea with this coat is it's a piece that's been handed down through generation and generation in her family of all the royals. So it's constantly just patched and put back together, and it's kind of hanging on by a thread. So that's why it's this mishmash of constantly being felted together for warmth and also to maintain the integrity so the garment doesn't fall apart.
Wow. So it's really her royal regalia.
Yes, it is.
Now, was there the same level of detail on all of your principles?
Yes, there was. Again, as one of the other designers, John had mentioned, there's a lot to be said about handwork. And in our story, we do see later, in certain areas that they have pedal foot machines and pedal foot devices that make metals and things. But there's no actual electric sewing machines because there's no electricity. Right. So we had an amazing team in our workroom that did hand stitching. So most of the garments, they may have, straight stitches to hold the integrity of the garment together, but so much of it is all hand stitched. Any of the embroidery that we did that was kind of a sense of braille that kind of told your lineage and story, as well as in the Alchemy, there's raised pieces like subdermal, there's embroidery, there's little trinkets and pieces that are found. We have sea glass that's sewn into objects. So it's all these treasures that they kind of find that have good texture to them that are sewn into the garment. So yes, there was a lot of handwork, a lot of handwork.
And do you keep that handwork above the waist?
We try. It's really hard because, I love a good medium shot, and a lot of directors like a tight shot and a long shot. So yeah, you try and pick and choose your battles with that, and you try and keep things here close to the face that aren't distracting, but yeah, we did a lot of work and a lot of around the hands. And like with the Queen, we made these incredible rings because she does things resonates with sound, like on her entrance and departure. So that was all great because that was always here and close to her face. So.
Tell me about this woman on our next picture.
Oh, so she is the wise person in the village. So she's basically kind of like a shaman. Her character is the dreamer. So with her, we did a lot of headpieces that again are made out of bits of metal. In the storyline, they call the metal the smooth that never rots because it just stays around forever, and they use it in all different ways. So with the dreamer, I had a coat that was made. I had mentioned earlier in one of the boxes of hides I got had all of these animal faces in the bottom, heads in the bottom, and I asked the gentleman who got it through for some First Nations people, why were all the heads in the bottom? And he said, well, nobody uses the heads because they just use the fur for coats. Mm-hmm. And so in my mind, I thought, well, I can't let them go in vain. We have to use these heads. And so for me, I made a coat for the dreamer because she's a very, very heady character and she sees into the future and she can read people's minds. So I made her coat of all the faces of the animals. And Tantu, who is the actress here, who is First Nations, was really cool about it and sat with me, and we went through which animals she was really drawn to using and not. So with her, she's a very prominent character in the script, and she's very torn about who to follow. So she's powerful.
Let me just ask you about their eyes. Yes. I think that's kind of obvious. I noticed that their eyes had that cataract look. Mm. Was that done in post, or did everyone wear? It was done in post? Tell me about it.
We did it in post because each tribe was between 100 to 200 people, and the army and everything as well. So having that many people, because you'd have to wear a full scalaris, which covers the whole eye. You have to have technicians to manage each person. So
Right.
so you have to have technicians to manage each person. So what they did was after in post, what's happened is they've removed the pupil from the eye. So in casting, especially for background, we tried to do casting with dark toned eyes because it's hard to detect the pupil there. So that saved with a lot of the CG work, which we know is quite expensive. So when I was doing casting in the background, I would try and find different physical attributes for each tribe, but then trying to generally go with a darker eye.
That's wonderful. I love to hear when costume designers can work with casting background and atmosphere. That's amazing that you were allowed to do that.
Yeah, I think, working with, a couple of the directors that I work with, on various projects. So you develop kind of this trust and, I really enjoy doing that. And it's an overall, because as we all know, like for costumes, it's the body and the face means so much to what we're building. We get scripts early on and we may have in our minds what we think that character and that actor is going to look like. And like, as an example, the woman you just brought up, the dreamer, originally she was scripted as a man. But when Francis met this actress, he was really taken by her. So we changed. And so I think that is really important for us to be able to work closely with casting and hair and makeup and props, because it all affects what the costume will be.
So let's look at the last picture where we get to see a lot of different people. So who are your principals and who was really, this was one tribe, right?
Yes, this is the Alchemy Tribe. So Jason is in the center and he's Baba Voss. And the two actors on either side of him are kind of, actually the three actors that are next to him are all very integral to his tribe. They're kind of this really small core group that ends off breaking off and going away in the end through the journey. And so with this tribe, this is them going into battle. So they know that the Queen's army, they know an army's coming. And so they're all dressed in their battle gear. And because they're kind of a peaceful, naturalistic tribe, they don't really have all the armor and metal pieces that the Queen's army does have. So they make things like, they make things out of animal hides. We had things made out of bark, armor made out of bark. We had, boiled leather, like Baba's chest piece that's under that is a really hard leather chest plate. And then you could see on his arm, it's all animal antlers. And so it's anything that they find that they can kind of repurpose. And then the challenge that we did have with the helmets for both sides of the battle, the Alchemy and the Ohanneson, is we had to come up with a design of helmets that don't need vision because no one can see, but we needed to be able to have the actors and all the stunt people be able to fight in these helmets. So it was a very big challenge coming up with something that, that worked functionally, but looked proper as to what our needs were for the story. So that was definitely in the beginning one of the biggest challenges that we had, because we have soldiers on horseback, we have people with dogs, we have people running and climbing up the side of mountains, there's all the actors plus all the stunt people. So we came up with a bunch of really clever kind of ideas of what we could do to kind of make breaks in them, or did massive ventilation, because they would need the ventilation because it's heavy, where the Queen's army, had repurposed metal pieces that you could see are constantly soldered and repaired back together. And we just did lots of ventilation through it.
Well, I've never heard of anybody having this kind of challenge as a costume designer, where you have blind people. So your emphasis really is on texture and you can't depend on color.
Yeah. And it also fit went along with that. I mean, some, like with the Queen, we tend to go with flowier, more luxurious pieces, longer pieces, that goes back to the royalty of having excess fabrics. And then, she kind of takes all the best of what's out in the world. Her tax collectors bring things back. So as I was mentioning to you, when you and I were having a conversation, she has these posture collars that we made out of, door brackets and hinges, but she also has songbirds for her pleasure. So they're all coated in feathers that make it, delicate and nice against her neck for feel, but that, she's always in fear someone's going to slit her neck. So this is all made out of metals, And we did one out of telephone wire, which I was inspired from that. I worked on a film in Africa, and the amount of repurposing of plastics there is really, really incredible. So I was inspired to use old telephone wire and make a posture collar and a complete corset out of that.
I'm just in awe.
Oh,
thank you. Thank you so much. I think it's time to bring everybody back in. So I want to tell you all that at UCLA, when I'm teaching our students, our graduate students and our undergraduate students, I say that we are in the golden age of television. And I must say, seeing all of your work, I know that I'm telling them the truth. I feel like your work, Jill, John, Trish, is emblematic of the best of costume design. And I've never seen television the way television is now. Not one of you have done anything differently than it seems to me that you would do on a major feature. You're all creating major features for Apple TV. These are major works of art for each one of you. The second point I'd like to make before I ask you questions is I also, each one of you have talked about working with the director, showrunner. And the other thing that's said about our work in television and film is that we're in a visual medium. But in fact, we're in a literary medium, because each one of you, John, you're talking about Emily Dickinson and going back to the script all the time, talking about the script, what makes sense. Jill, it's a totally recreated world, but you're going back to the reality of that world and you're having those conversations, right?
Mm-hmm. Trish, you're always trying to figure out what makes sense for a sightless world. You're always having to question, does this work? Does this make sense? So we're very smart people. And I always said that costume designers, in addition to being incredibly resourceful, we have to be the smartest people because we're always analyzing that screenplay. And it's more about, and see if you agree with this, it's more about the conversation than even the costumes. Because first you have to figure out who the people are and what the world is. So let me open it up there. And just say, what was your walking into these three incredibly challenging? None of these was a straight line. I mean, John, you had the crooked Emily Dickinson story where it was totally updated in a way. Jill, you had women in the space program back then, and Trish, you had to totally create a sightless world. Can you talk about how you related to your directors and showrunners? Where did this conversation begin? Who wants to start?
Jill, should you start since you were first before?
Sure, I'm happy to start. I found that the conversation started with the writers in the writers' room. They had been working on the scripts for months already, and so they already pretty much had at least the first half of the season laid out. And then we talked we talked about the original premise of, a retelling of the space race. And then we started to talk about the parameters. Where did we want to, bring the modern forward? Where did we want to, stay simple and real and grounded, since we're telling a new story? And it really became about that. That's where the conversation started from. So I was asked to keep the clothes as real as possible to help ground the show in the fact that we were going in a different direction. But props got to do a lot of really interesting, phones that were ahead of the time. We had cars that were ahead of their time, things like that. And a lot of technology. There was a big push forward in technology. So that was shown a lot in the show. And then it became about, how I could best help Ron Moore and the rest of the writing team tell the story with the clothes, and when to use color, pattern, and texture, and when not to use color, pattern, and texture. And then again, also, as we've all talked about, it's also about the silhouette.
Mm-hmm. And John, you really are like the bookend to that conversation.
Yeah, it was my initial meetings. I researched everything deeply before we began any of our conversations, because I knew that it was important for me to bring a visual vocabulary with the art director to the words on the page. And so I just kept digging deeper and deeper and falling into the world of the colors and the patterns. And the photography was very interesting too, because at first, of course, I was coming up against the typical photographs of people just staged for a photograph. Yeah. But then as I went deeper, even in the 1840s and 1850s, you find these very comical and almost like selfies that people were posing for as well. And no, they weren't doing it in their private bathroom. They actually were doing it with a photographer, but I'd never seen anything like them. And I thought, this is what's going to crack the ice. This is what's going to get Emily out of the amber that she has been encased in. And so I got very excited about that. And once I started showing the colors, potential colors and patterns we could go mad with, Elena found that very compatible with what she was trying, with what the words that she put on the paper.
Was Elena shocked when you showed her all that?
I think she was. I mean, I knew that she sent me on that journey. I mean, I don't know that she knew I would come back with the rich load that I was able to discover. Yeah. But I think being an artist herself and really relating to Emily, Elena truly was expecting for that to be there.
Yeah, it was because you had to pair those clothes with that wild sensibility of that early Emily, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because I mean, unfortunately, there's one photograph of Emily Dickinson, and there's one dress that is known to exist that was Emily's. And they date to a much later period, once she had become very reclusive and seldom left her bedroom, because the world that she had in her brain didn't match up with the world around her.
Mm. And Trish, I mean, do you... You've done so many films that are imaginative, but were you prepared when you read this script? I mean, how did you what do I want to say? I always think that costume designers don't quite know what's going to appear in their inbox any morning. And when you first received this, did you say, how do I approach? I mean, should I take this job?
Well, I think, definitely a big lure to it was Francis Lawrence, because I've done a couple films with him, and one of the first ones was Catching Fire with him, and he really gave me a lot of freedom. And he, and at this point we've developed a lot of trust. And so I'm at a really great point, thankfully, where I show him like 2 fittings and then I just do what I want to a certain degree, so, but yeah, I think when I got, and I am definitely, I push back, there's some things in C that definitely, there's some bad guys in C that I chose to dress a certain way. And there was an issue that came up of like, do they look like KKK? And I said, yes, they do, because they're bad guys. And so, so I stand strong with certain things and push back when I know it's for a good cause or it definitely tells the story. I'm also very collaborative, and Francis knows that. So I always have his back or the actor's back and the story's back. But when I first got it, it was, for me, I'm very inspired by the world and what's happening in the world and indigenous tribes and indigenous people. And, and I travel quite a lot, and I like to embed myself whenever I can into different social groups. So for me, that was a big draw. I mean, for it's definitely, there's a couple movies or projects I've done that are super close to my heart, and this one will always be really close to my heart because everybody came together as a family and just created beautiful things, like you guys were mentioning as well about the production designer or the prop person. Like we all just worked together and helped and and just raised each other up wherever we could. And when we if someone had a great idea, you just shared it, and it was like, oh, I'm going to make shoes out of plastic 2-liter soda bottles. And then the production designer was like, what? And I was like, well, let's build houses out of that, and she was incredible. And we went to ocean and sea legacy warehouses of scrap that's pulled out of the ocean, and I made things out of buoys and out of ropes. And one of my biggest treasures that's funny was we found it was a thing of, we'd hold it up and be like, what do you think this is? And whoever guessed, I was like, you'll get a prize. It was a flip-flop that had been in the ocean for who knows how long. And it's on I put it on one of the characters because it was like this amazing prize. And so, yeah, I mean. Okay,
listen, that's an incredibly sad story, but it sounds like you had much too much fun on this project.
It was great. I mean, I'm not saying I didn't work 25-hour days, but it was incredible.
You had way too much fun. So, really, my question is, and Trish, you already answered it because it sounds like you were given everything you ever wanted and more. But what's your best collaborative experience? And let me start with Jill. What do you look for in a director? And what's your best collaborative experience when you read that script? What do you need from the director?
I find that basically what I need from director, showrunner, producers is what the trajectory of the story is, and what is the story that we want to tell, and how best can I help tell that story. So the more information I can get, the more that they have created kind of the foundation of the world, and what they want to see, what their kind of overall general feeling is of this world, then I am then able to go in and kind of do the details of what the people are wearing to help tell that story. Again, how they fit, how they color, pattern, texture, and silhouette.
Yes, because it's every frame you're working on.
Absolutely.
And it's the depth of the frame. And then it's making sure that we believe the people, because if we don't believe that story for all mankind, you can imagine you have to make those people believable every single time. And that's why I think it is brilliant that you went back to those catalogs of every man or every person catalogs, those
Correct.
Sears catalogs, to really reach back into our albums, maybe not at my students' albums, but my albums, and make it look like us then, right?
Correct. Exactly.
And John, is it the same kind of thing when you work with a showrunner? What do you really need from that showrunner?
I don't necessarily need them to give me any sort of visual framework, but they really have to verbalize to me that what the story is that they want to tell. And I can, as Jill was saying, you fill in the detail. You guide it in that direction. You know how, as a costume designer, any kind of designer, often the impact that something that you design has on the general audience. And so I need to know what I'm supposed to be laying forth for the audience, so that we can guide them through the story. I mean, costumes often take up, a quarter of the screen, and that is a vision that is telling a story. And I always say, it's really important because of that. And you have to be careful, what you put out, and you want to make sure that it's simpatico with your showrunner director. And of course, ideal situation is the showrunner that you are simpatico with, and is telling something with the heart that you want to be telling.
Yeah, I often say that costume design owns the most important real estate in the frame. because it's the actors. We're on the actor's body, and we're right there in the middle of the frame, because you got to have the actor in the frame, otherwise we're not with the people. I also want to take your point and say that whether intended or not, costume is always telegraphing story to the audience, whether intentional or not, whether conscious or not. So taking your point, John, we have to be very careful about our intention, because it's all going to be just all around here. And about being with a showrunner, you want to have the same sense of humor. You have to be able to, right? You have to be able to have the same sense of humor, the same frames of reference to get along. I love the way you speak about Elena. I love the way you speak about Jill. I love you speak about Ron. And Trish, I love the way you talked about Francis. You all connected deeply with your showrunners. And I think that may be why your shows look so great. And what's so successful about each of these shows, that it wasn't just you alone working in a vacuum, that you all worked closely with the people who had a vision and provided great creative leadership to all of you. That's what it seems to me on the outside. So we're coming to a close. Do you have any last words, please? Was this a great experience?
It's a great experience, and I'd just like to address something you talked about earlier about, all three of us and what we put into doing a TV show. And I'm familiar with both of your work, all three of your work, and I think it's, I'm speaking for myself, but looking at your work, I know it's all with you as well. It's like you don't approach it differently because it's TV. I mean, I think we're all very passionate people, and it's our work. It's our work. So you have to, whatever the project is, I do commercials as well, and I feel the same way. I'll fight just as hard for what's right or trying to get it done in time. And I think that's the big thing, is like you're saying, TV is so elevated now. I mean, look at the actors and directors that we have doing TV, besides the costume designers and production designers that are doing TV. And it's like, why would we not just deliver our very best? I don't think any of us would choose to do less, So I think TV right now is in such an amazing place, because you get to have that 8 hours or 9 hours of 10 hours to tell the story and the content. I'm thrilled to do TV and film. It fills a need on both sides.
It's passion.
It's passion.
We all share that passion. Were you going to say something, Jill?
I was going to say, I absolutely believe that some of the best writing and storytelling is happening on television, during this time. And to be part of it, I have many people who have said to me, don't you miss doing features, and don't you, miss doing a long, one project over a period of time? And there's something about the longer form of storytelling that you get with television that, for me, is so much more satisfying as a costume designer, that I'm telling the story and the characters' arcs through the clothing over 8 episodes, 10 episodes, 12 episodes, rather than an hour and a half to try and tell one story. So I'm so much more satisfied actually doing television than, not to say I wouldn't still do features, but there's a real satisfaction for me in being able to be a storyteller in television. And especially with I wanted to just say, especially these incredible projects that Apple TV has brought to our TV screen. I think they really have, looked for the best and the brightest, and have brought amazing projects to their new platform.
Coming up with these, as Jill said, lengthy stories that just can put in so much detail and depth and heart and intelligence, that I think if you have the stamina for it, it's the highest exciting moments you can have are being part of a television series right now.
Well, nobody works harder than television designers. We all know, we can all agree. So pat yourselves on the back for me. Thank you, UCLA School of Theater, Film, and Television. And thank you to Apple TV for bringing us all together today. Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.